Welcome to Business on Purpose, the podcast for hardworking entrepreneurs who drive our economy. I'm your host, Barry Barrett, and as a sales leader and business owner, I understand the challenges that come with entrepreneurship. Each episode, I am interviewing business owners who have faced the same struggles you have. Low revenue, a lack of scalability in their sales force. Together, we're going to explore their entrepreneurial journey and uncover the valuable lessons they've learned along the way. From mentors to advice, we'll dive deep into what has helped these business owners get unstuck and move forward towards success. Whether you're just starting out or you're a seasoned entrepreneur, the podcast is for you. Be sure and follow and subscribe to this podcast as we learn from the experiences of successful business owners and navigate the road to entrepreneurship together. Let's get started. So we'll get started, man. The first thing that I want to talk to you about, and of course, this is our first podcast we're going to release, and I'm going to have it with my big brother, Mike. And the funny thing is you are one of my mentors in life. And so that started at a young age. We're only 10 months and 28 days apart. And so it's odd to say that for most people, but I think all the relationships are different. And it's just been that way, and it's been good. So this is about mentorship. And so the first question I want to ask you is, who was your first mentor and what did that look like?
Oh gosh, like all the way back, or if it was anything, as first starting out as just Papa as a mentor to me and how to become a man and in a place of no men in our lives. And that's a big part. You got to start somewhere. And that probably set the course for me taking on responsibilities. Probably shouldn't have, but we did, right? At the end of the day. But that was the first mentor, but my life is full of mentors as we go along. So.
Yeah. So I figured you would say that. Papa, he's our granddad, just so everybody knows. And that was the first mentorship. So at a young age, we grew up around him. Of course, our story is we didn't have a dad. He took off, and who knows the mysteries of those things, right? How do you do that? But what was the first thing you remember Papa teaching you?
Oh gosh. The very first memory I have was shooting my 20 gauge shotgun of all things. And I remember that like it was yesterday. And I guess everybody says different things, but he didn't even tell me this. I told him and to come to find out I was between 2 and 3 years old. So he was showing me. I don't remember which uncle, either Ernie or Steve, that had it as far as holding, but Papa was behind me, guiding me through that shot. And the very first thing is that, which my love of hunting obviously has spawned over many years, but that was the first thing that I remember.
Yeah. I remember showing me how to shoot the 16 gauge. I know everybody has envy about my 16 gauge. I think everybody wishes they had that one.
Everybody asks about it. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, I'm never giving that up. But
Yeah.
I remember him teaching me how to shoot a shotgun. And I tell people, I'm like, it's not even a thing. People talk about gun safety and where you're worried about your kids, or I'm like, it wasn't, I don't even remember being interested, or not interested, but I don't remember being tempted about picking up a gun and trying to play with it, because it was just in our house. It was just what we did. And I think a lot of people think that's odd. I love it.
And we were taught about it. It's like you take care of the weapon that you have. You don't just grab it. You always treat it as it being loaded. So you don't grab it without a parental guidance around you ever. And we were taught how to clean it. We was taught how to load it. And it's like anything, right? If you're not taught the basics, you can't expand.
Yeah, I love it. So then, as you move through, like you start your mentorship in your adulthood, like who took over, who taught you how to? You own an automotive repair business, and so obviously Papa was an automotive repair guy growing up. He had his own business. It wasn't like the business that you have today, but who then took over the mantle maybe of teaching you about automotive repair or other mentorship?
Yeah, I came in and Uncle Steve was working at a tire, but he was one of the best alignment men in the area. So he taught it. A lot of people come to him if they couldn't fix it. And at that time he would get, I want to say it was like 55% of the ticket. So everything that he did, and he was really fast, he was really good. He was the foreman, so he got the biggest lump sum of that ticket. So anything he sold, he was a hustler, and not in a bad sense. He just, when he seen something, he would find quick ways to fixing that. And
Yeah.
I was the same way, come to find out, which I was a little higher educated than all of them. But I was all about getting in there to make money. And we learned that farming and around that environment, talking about other mentors, those farmers, principals, coaches, things that we had. But getting to that point, when I think about it, the form of which you go, the way in which you go, I could have had my school paid for here in Lexington, Kentucky. I could have played basketball and had a different degree, but I wanted to be a technician. So there was a lot of that going on in my head. Like I just want to get in the workforce, try to make my way and try to make a good living. So all that transpired. But once Steve had moved on to another place, that place was getting sold and they had moved me down to Richmond. And funny thing is, you're talking about working, like they would pay me down there, but it wasn't as busy as Lexington. So I was still wanting to learn, hunger for learning. And I would come to Lexington, work for free and work under Uncle Steve or some other guys that was really good at it. So I would drive from Richmond to Lexington, which is about 30 minutes, to work for free, to learn more, to get to the next step. And I used to have uh, an old boss that called me cocky, and when you feel like you're good at something, it just probably comes across wrong to certain people that don't want to give it their all. And sometimes middle management, man, they work all the time, but I don't think they give it their all in my experience.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about everybody, but in my experience in the automotive field, it's pretty typical. They got the title and they're carrying it on their shoulder, and they never invest in anybody. Then that place, they wanted to pay me. I was pushing $50,000 a year right out of school in 1996, 97 in that area. And all of a sudden Sears had bought the place and wanted to give me $9 an hour. And I was like, I'm out. I'm not doing that. And because I was getting like 45% of the total ticket. So
Yeah.
as much as I did I'd stick around waiting on a job. If I was getting paid hourly, I would have been miserable. I went on to a dealership. And at that point, Dave Phillips, which you know, and Tony Arundel worked at that dealership, and they took me under their wing, and they were probably the top tier technicians at that time. So they were 15 or 10, 15 years older than me. And man, I just started learning from them. So any hangups I had, they would bail me out and show me. But the funny thing is, and I tell people this and they're like, there ain't no way I would do that. But if I didn't know something or I couldn't remember how to do it from when I was at school, I would just pay them whatever I got from that job. So they would basically, so if I sold the job for 5.5 hours book time and it was done, I couldn't do it. If they showed me one thing or the whole thing, I would pay them the whole job and they wouldn't even ask me for it. But I felt obligated. It's like learning. It's school. I paid for school and I could have had it paid for, but I knew if I went to school up there, it would show me drivability electrical more. So I knew that if I take that extra sacrifice, I wouldn't forget it. So if it comes out of your wallet, you're probably not going to forget it if it's hard. And so that's what I would do. And if it happened 3 times in a row, by that second or third time, I got it. I sat and I learned from the best. And probably that first year of the dealership, I learned more than I ever did in school. Not to disgrade what I learned in school.
Mm-hmm.
I think I was always taught work ethic. When I went to school, I had to work 40 to 60 hours a week and plus go to school 26 hours a week. That work ethic was there. So that's awesome. And then when some of those things that go on as you're learning, you still learning the job. And if you don't, you die. And what I found was is people my age now, I'm 47, so people my age would start declining as technicians. And even people that I knew and trusted just went backwards. And
Mm-hmm.
people that were high level, they just quit learning and y- that's crippling. And I just started a Vistage group. I don't know if we had talked since that, but I was just humbled for one and just grateful to be in such a room of people. But the one thing, they were all higher level than I am at this moment, in a sense. Like they all have done some amazing things and some of them in even in short time. And but what the characteristic was, all of us went through a lot of the same things or currently are going through the same things. Doesn't matter what they have or what they made or how intelligent they was in their businesses, they've experienced it. So here we are. One thing that they were doing, they were trying to figure out how to do something. We were in this, and how Vistage works is like you ask a series of questions, they bring an issue, and you ask a series of questions, try to just mold it down into one thing,
Mm-hmm.
just like EOS.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to create a team and boil it down to what is it that is causing the issue. Well, this is what they were doing. They were walking through this issue, and he thought it was how is he going to do it, and it was why that just solidified it for him, not how, why. And he got emotional. It was emotional, and he figured out his why. Here we are asking him all these questions, and people are putting in their input. And then all of a sudden, how it works is you ask a question and then you give clarity. So you're trying to say how you think you would do it when just popping out ideas. And
Yeah.
it was
So that's
pretty awesome.
yeah, that's called the Socratic method. And the other side of my business is I teach sales, and you know how I have an affinity for rhyming, and
Right.
so
Because
if
it makes
they
it true.
it does, it always makes it true. And so if you understand why, they usually buy, right? So it's the same thing with
Mhm.
leaders. People don't buy what, they buy why. And then the why is the deep, meaningful purpose behind it.
Yeah.
And so that's good. So mentorship is it works at every level. You're already looking for new mentors. And so I look at the idea who John Eldridge is, and he has a
Yeah.
book and he talks about the manhood, the masculinity journey, and he's talking about boyhood, cowboy, warrior. He has the lover, the king, and the sage. And so what advice, if you're thinking about the business and the stages it goes through, you start out, you think about the boy and the cowboy. That's how a business starts.
Yeah.
What advice would you give a new business owner if you could just sit down and say, you're starting a business? This is the advice that I would give you. What is that?
Yeah. First, I'd probably just buy a business that's already started. Because when you're bootstrapping it, obviously there's a lot of things tied to that. One is pride. I think most people have a tremendous pedestal pride on how they started sometimes, and they can't get over that. And even when I was listening to an issue from owner that was a sales guy that bought into the business, so he acquired the business, but he took it to a way different level, as what most people will do.
Mhm.
But he didn't have to start it like I always say, I was making six figures, working around the clock, 36 hours straight. A lot of times my wife's bring me dinner and bring the
Mhm.
kids so they could see me
Yeah.
sometimes. The kids were so young. And when I look back on it, what an honor. My wife is a pinnacle part of it, even though she don't claim the business. She just says, for a long time, she said, it's your business. And I'm like,
Yeah.
no, that's not how it works. But one thing I would say is if you can find a business to acquire that had room for growth, like buying rental properties. If I can find something that I can bring value to that could immediately have impact and then move forward. Because when you're starting out from the ground up, I made six figures and paid myself the next time 24,000. I'm like,
Yeah.
thank goodness I was out of debt. Other than my house and my wife had a good job, but we were still making under six figures when we
Right.
were used to making well over it. And I think at the end of the day, if I was mentoring somebody, I would say find a shop. If it's a shop, make sure it has the right people that you want, or that it has a name or where you can hire into it.
Mm-hmm.
Do your due diligence on that. Find the values that you could add to it, which is most of the time sales, because we know that for a fact. Like, number one thing to drive your revenue is fix your sales process and be done with it, because nobody cares about who's fixing the car as long as it's done the right the first time, or you take care of it if it isn't,
Yeah.
and you build that
Revenue.
rapport. Yeah.
Revenue is the lifeblood of every business. I don't
Yeah.
care. It's the number one thing that I see people struggle with. There's a lot of people who can be a technician. You can learn that skill, but if you can't sell that skill, you can't be an entrepreneur. And Dan Sullivan says 80% of people don't have the ability to sell their unique ability. And so that's what entrepreneurship is for, is you open up a pathway to be able to sell other people's unique ability, and that gives them meaning and purpose for their life, which I love, right? So now we're transitioning. You've been in business for how many years? So if you look at that, you're in the warrior king stage of business, right? Some hopefully you're not as much warrior as you are king, right? So we start out in our warrior stage where we're just going out, killing something, dragging it home. And what are you going to give advice now to people who have been in business for 5, 10, 15 years, and they're in that stage of their business and they've hit the ceiling because they're doing some of the work, they're working in the business. What do you got for them now?
Yeah. You have to find people to invest in. And I think for me, when I look around me now, and I've had some tough losses, but all those people stayed with me 6 and 7 years. And when I say tough, is that I brought them up in a way of mentoring them,
Mhm.
helped them, and they went on to do bigger and better things. Now, some of them hurt my feelings, but
Mhm.
because you take it so personal, I wouldn't take things so personal. I would highly train them while they're there. That way they're effective and productive. Watch the numbers and find out what your metrics are. That way you can watch them and always be recruiting. And I think that's where I've failed a lot, is my trust factor is huge
Mhm.
until you misuse it. And so the people that I had in here with the relationships that I built over these years, unfortunately, a lot of those guys are getting older too. And what did I say earlier? 45 to 50 years old, they start falling off.
Mhm.
So if you're not mentoring younger people, and that's where I push some younger guys that never touched anything. And when we can talk about this generation all we want, but we have a lot to do with that, because we
Oh
want
yeah.
our kids to have more than what we had. So we
Mhm.
said, just do good in school. Well, now
Yeah.
they
Where
learn
good's
to
at.
associate with acclamation, right? They're not becoming productive human beings. We're not making them wash dishes and wash their own clothes and clean our rooms and mow the yard and all the chores that we said we would never make our kids do once we had them. And now we can't find anybody has any experience, because we give all of our farm jobs away or whatever it might be. So
Mhm.
me and you, if like how I started, we were driving around old vehicles,
Oh
even
yeah.
parents. So if we wanted to get around, we had to figure it out. And I remember one time at Dog Walk Market, I pulled out, I'd stopped in there and give me a drink, and I backed out after cleaning a sawmill, and I heard my truck make a big pop. And I was like, oh man. And my steering wheel felt funny. So I got out, looked under there, and I could see that the joint from the tie rod had come separated. So I'm like, I got Napa. What's that? 15 miles away, something like
Oh
that.
yeah.
I
Oh
was
yeah.
like, so I looked in the back of my truck. I had some wire, tied that thing in there, and I drove it to 15 miles and got the part and put it on in the parking lot. It's like you learn to adapt and overcome because you there's no choice. You're not calling
Necessity
on a
is the
tow
mother
truck.
of invention.
Right. Somebody would have probably strapped a chain and drug me, or I don't know, but or took me to town and come back. But I was like, man, if I can get there, I can get this thing and get it done. But I think that's what we've done. And if I was telling anybody, I'm like, you've always got to be invested in bringing somebody up with the technicians that you have and just monitor it. And
Mm,
I think you'll be better off. They're not going to be the productive person that you think they ought to be.
yeah.
They're not going to be you because it's not their business. But if you can find somebody 75 to 80% there, you can teach them the rest. You can help them with the morale of it. And that's what I would do if I
Yeah.
had to do over.
Good. I
The way
love
I'm
it.
doing it now. You're either going to do it now or later, right? You're not going to, there is no, it's too late and I'll just do it myself. If you E-Myth Revisited, that stuff's true. No doubt that he did all that study and it wasn't true. He's seen the frustrations of all of us.
Yeah. I love it. That's it. And so now you said your next stage of being mentored is Vistage, right?
Yeah.
So you're being mentored through that. So where are you mentoring other people outside of business?
Yeah, obviously our faith, that's our biggest thing. And we do a thing called a Emmaus Walk, and you've been a part of it, and I have. And our family's a big part of it in the community that we actually helped start. So we went south of here, and we had such a big people that we sponsored that we have over 500 members now of our community, and it's growing fast. You meet a lot of men in that, and I actually get to the way it works. You get up and you can give talks,
Mhm.
and some people hear my testimony, and yeah, and it has a lot to do with being a father, right? And my son works that function as well, and all our brothers work that function, and I have some form of mentoring them and still do because they all work for me. It's
Mm.
nice to have them. And it's tough because you have to overcome some of the mindsets that we grew up around that me and you've already passed. And it's our job to push them on to someone else. And I'm starting a Bible study with some guys that I met that have been incarcerated. And
Mhm.
there's some people that have questions about the Bible that they're new to it, but they haven't given their life to Christ. It's nice to be able to walk them through some of those things because, I've been walking with Christ since I was 15. When you
Yeah.
look 32 years into this, and nobody's perfect. And I feel like that's what happens to these guys as they get in there is, man, I failed again. I can't do this. And I remember that.
Mhm.
And that outside, and there's no handcuff to this. I'm just doing it because it's something I serve
Mhm.
and it's part of me and it's a big part of me. And I know it's served me well in my business, the way that what I've learned growing up, the same fact. How do you want to be treated?
Yeah.
Whether you believe it or not, there's a lot of great things in that Bible.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, that's good life advice in there.
Yeah.
So now at the end of this, if you were going to give one piece of life advice for anybody, this is one piece of life advice that anybody can live by. Tell me what that is.
Just hold integrity.
Hmm.
That's number one for me. It's even in my mission statement. When I hire, that's one of the questions I'm going to ask them is like, what would you do in this situation? And if I like the answer, great. But if I don't, it, then I have to go and say, hey, are you open to be mentored?
Yeah, that's
Because you
good.
can't just because they don't think a lot of people don't understand integrity and they think it's this big honorable, it's a code I live by. It's doing what you say.
Hmm.
It has not a one thing to do, like people will say because I'm a Christian, that integrity is part of that. And it is, but the whole soul definition is doing what you say. And that's if you give a man your word, like Papa, he
Yeah.
could go and talk to men and they wouldn't say, "Oh, give me $50 because I'll hold it then." They held
Yeah.
it for him because he said he was gonna go get it, and that's what he
Yeah.
did. And if he told him somebody's gonna be there, he'd be there,
Yeah.
and he wouldn't be late.
Yeah.
And he probably switch uniforms to look like he didn't even work on the car, right? When
100%.
he's way cleaner than I'll ever be, but
Yeah.
we just that's the honor that I tell people. I'm like, people know that you mess up, and when you hide it, that's the failure.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
gotta stop doing that. It's to own it. And I'm in the middle of that right now with a team member that it's always oversell, how you oversell. It's like,
Oh, yeah.
your tie rod end is broke. Now, it being broken, your tie rod is, we just keeps repeating and over repeating, but wording it different. It's stop trying to overdo it.
Say it
You don't
once.
have to. Just say it once. This is it. If you don't, if that means you don't believe it if you repeat it,
Mhm.
in my opinion.
Yeah. That's good. I like
You're
it.
trying to sell yourself.
Yeah.
Oh, my wallet's too thin. I can't sell that part. I'm like, that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
And the funny thing is that I was on him today about of closing ratio. Our closing ratio dipped pretty good this month
Mhm.
versus last month. And I was like, man, what's going on? When our numbers are good, it's not that. So I was like, hey, why aren't we maximizing like we usually do? And I thought it was him. So I'm like, hey, I want you to go find out what your closing ratio is. Man, I went and looked at his closing ratio. It's like 67% for the last 3 months.
Wow.
And I'm like, he's getting trained.
Mhm.
And the other one, I was expecting different results. And I'm like, hey, you got to figure out why. But he's seeing way more cars. He's seeing
Right.
about 50 versus 30. So it will drag your numbers down. But he was up until the last 3 months selling at that level. So
Right.
I'm like, hey, you got to find a way to overcome objections. And
Mhm.
if it's reading a sales book or let's listen to some phone calls
Yeah.
and figure out why. And right now, how people buy, they will buy based on what they hear on the news or the stock market. They're up and down. They get nervous. But if you
Right.
make them feel confident and you're
Mhm.
bringing value to it, they'll buy it. And
Absolutely.
it's just basically maturity, right? It comes down
Mhm.
to it. I got two guys that are 2 years and under in a position that they've never done before, which I love. It's my
Mhm.
favorite kind of salesperson.
Yep.
We can teach it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's a long
I
way
agree.
around, but I got there.
I love it. That's it.
But
I appreciate you having me on here. You'll definitely be on the podcast again. Thanks a lot. Till next time.